Today's Teardown is an engine that I've never had the chance to buy until now. I've had lots of 5.7 Hemis on the channel. I've had several 6.1 liter SRT8 engines, but I've never had a 6.4 liter Hemi, and that's what we're going to tear down today. This is an engine out of a 2015 Dodge Ram 2500. The 6.4, this is the second year. This was an option. I think 2014 was the first. And these engines produce 410 horsepower, 429 horsepower, and it is one of the most expensive non-diesel cores that exist. I had to pay a lot to get this. I think it's worth it because the parts are very valuable if and only if they're good. So I got my fingers crossed that there's not a lot of carnage here today. I don't know if we're going to find something super minor or if it's totally destroyed. This particular 6.4 liter Hemi is a core return, which means the salvage yard I bought this core from charged the customer for a core charge when they purchased a good used engine, whether it was 500 or 1,000 or 1,500. A lot of these yards charge a core charge. Sometimes it's 50 bucks. It all depends on how desirable the engine is. There's several different reasons why cores are expensive. One of them is scarcity. Another one is their application. And another one is what is the demand for it. How many different places want to buy that core for whether rebuilding purposes or parting it out like myself. Thankfully, I was at the right place at the right time and I got this. Now, unfortunately, because this is a core return, I don't have a story with it. I don't have miles. I don't know exactly what it's out of other than what the application said it fit, which is a 14 or 15 Dodge Ram 25 or 3500. So I don't have anything to go off of, but I'm excited to tear this down. And I'm also thankful because this was a quite expensive core that this still has the intake manifold. It's a big ticket item. It's a popular swap for 5.7 liter powered vehicles, makes some extra power, and it's very easy to do. I hope I can get a whole bunch more from it though, because the intake will not cover what I paid for it. Because there's no flex plate or torque converter on this thing, I'm assuming that it turns over, but let's find out for sure. Fingers crossed. Ooh, it doesn't turn over that great. It makes bad feelings inside. So it does turn. It feels like it's cutting through rust, but this thing was not in the rain. Oh, now it seems more normal. Did I get past a point? Oh, that was bad. Okay, so it doesn't turn over great at all. Let's pull the plugs. I'm going to start off very daring. Well, the dipstick, we're just going to work around it for now. No, it's not a V16. It's a V8. Uses 2 plugs per cylinder. It's not that crazy. Now, I thought this thing was not stored outside, but the more I look at it, there's some rust on the right bank. The left bank looks pretty good. I don't see anything smashed. I don't see anything bent. I don't see any signs that something drastically came apart in this engine. Now, the plugs don't look great. Nothing's destroyed, which gives me a little bit of hope, although I wonder how it turns out or turns over without plugs. Well, let's find out. Not great. Oh, I heard a noise in there. Nah, maybe not. It turns over a lot better without compression, but there's also a really bad spot. Let's pull the intake. Well, this has been off before. Now I think this beautiful intake should lift right off. Let's take a look down these ports. So far, so good. Pretty big intake ports. Nothing alarming yet. This all looks pretty good. Wait a minute. That doesn't look good. Looks like some moisture got in there. I hope that isn't what I think it is going to be. That one's open. There's one that's concerning, this one right here. Now I've read the comments and I see that I've got fans all over the world, but this one is in the way. So let's see if we can spin this off. It looks like this was already loose. I did not loosen this up before the video. Now we can start peeling the valve covers off. We'll start with the right-hand bank. What do we look like inside? Well, I don't see anything super concerning. So it looks pretty clean in here. There's a little bit of varnish. But most of these 6.4 Hemis are work trucks. So who knows what its maintenance was like. Or even how many miles are on it. Now onto the left bank, we have this dipstick tube in the way, and I think it's definitely unbolted from where it's supposed to be. So now I need to get this out of the way. I don't know if I prepared enough for this. Oh, there's still another bolt holding it in. That would help. Oh, that made it a lot better. Haha! It's ruined though. Probably from a forklift. Next we'll unbolt the valve cover. Say, oh, that's not good. Or wait, no, maybe that's normal. It seems odd to me. I feel like there should be a spring here to keep this in place. Boy, if this just had lifter failure, how awesome would that be? I don't see anything wrong at all. It looks good. Next, I'd like to get to the exhaust manifold, but I'd also like to remove the EGR pipe. So that's what we're going to do. Who put this clamp right? Why? Who did that? This is what I'm talking about. Clamp is right in front of this. It's ignorant. I understand it's for assembly purposes. Oh, you know what it is? You're supposed to use the bolt to push the clamp over. Clearly, that's what they want you to do. It's working. Let's just do this the right way. All right, now we're going to start unbolting the EGR pipe. Hopefully this works pretty easy. Oh yeah. Ooh, those are unhappy feeling. This one, I don't know if I can get on that one as easily. Let's see if we can do some dumb stuff here. That might break. Oh yeah, we got her. Ooh, that's warm. All right, so I can at least get that out when the exhaust manifold comes off, which is precisely what we're going to do next. And we're off. Let's get this pesky little bracket out of the way. At this point, it's time to crack the rocker arms loose. So the valve train looks pretty good. I don't see any damage at all. I looked the push rods over. All the ends look like they've been well oiled. This all looks really good. Before we get any further, there is a bolt that goes from the front cover to the cylinder head, so we'll get that knocked out before we forget. Next, we need to remove this harness so we have access to these bolts. Next, this top row of head bolts. Now I can crack the head bolts loose. See what's behind head number 1. Is there something else holding it down? It's still very on there. Let's get blue. We gotta get this free a little bit. I think we're good now. Well, my first thought is that it seems weird that none of the pistons are at the top of the bore. That's weird, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong yet, because it just depends on the position of the crank, which I'm not going to turn it over until we get the other head off, but we are going to conduct some science because we have to. Them's the rules. I mean, everything seems to check out so far. So that's yick. Ugh. The rest of this doesn't look too terrible. Some vertical scratches. That's some pretty significant wear. This might be a higher mileage engine. I don't see any marks on the pistons from making contact with anything it wasn't supposed to. And the cylinder head also looks pretty decent. I don't see any drop seats. I don't think these things do that. I think this is new enough where that doesn't happen. The head gasket looks pretty good. I don't see any signs that it's breached. It's definitely good. Next, we need to get the exhaust manifold off the other side. Next, we need to crack the rocker shafts loose, but I'm going to move this out of the way. Same story on this side. No valve train damage that I could see. All the push rods look good. Nothing's bent. All looks good so far. Same stitch on this side. We need to get this harness off of these bolts. Now we can crack the head bolts loose. What's behind head number 2? Let me lock my engine stand real quick. Well, the head gasket looks okay. There's a little bit of oil there. It's not a breach. I don't see any problems there. Looks good. But again, no pistons at top dead center. That's just not right, guys. Why are there no pistons at top dead center? We have 8 chances for that to happen. But before we investigate that, we must conduct our super scientific test. That one's just rocking in the bore. I can definitely tell there's definitely some rust in here. So clearly some moisture sat in this thing. And this was the one cylinder that had rusty looking plugs. And that definitely has rust on the bore. And that could be why it's so difficult to turn over. But still doesn't seem like that would be enough. A little bit more rust here. None of this is too terrible looking. Obviously, it's nothing you want to just put back together and run. But something is still wrong here. Why are there no pistons all the way at the top of the board? Let's turn this thing over. But before we do that, let's take a look at the cylinder head. I don't see any issues. This was the one that was pretty rusty. You can definitely tell there's some pitting on the valve. It's definitely going to need a valve job. I don't see anything too terrible, really. All looks pretty decent. So now some more science. We're going to see if every piston comes up to the top of the bore. Because if it doesn't, we kind of have our answer here. So that rear one does. Second one does. First one does. Third one does. Let's go to the other bank. Second one does. First one does. Third one does. Last one does. So, not really that bad. I don't see any cause for concern yet. If one didn't come to the top of the bore, it could indicate a bent rod from a hydrolock situation, which is initially what I thought when I saw the rust on the plugs and the way it turned over. But the more I look at this, I think the way it turned over was related to the rust and not a bent rod. The next thing I'd like to do is remove this EGR cooler, this pipe, and the EGR valve, which surprisingly seems to be in pretty good shape. And I say surprisingly because most of the time something is bent or broken. All right, the valve is off. Now I have these two rubber hoses, 1 and 2. And it's off. Now we're going to spend some time cleaning the front of this up. We've got a water pump and this tensioner. We'll get started here. One more right here. Oh, there's more than one more. Oh, did you see everything settle? I think we're loose now. Let's see if anything's going to hang us up here or if we can just pull this off. No, I think we need blue for this. Oh, there's a 10 millimeter right here holding this thing up. And our water pump is off. This is quite the pump. Looks like there's a little bit of crusties in here, but overall, this thing looks pretty nice. Spins nice. There's no play in the bearing. This looks great. This is probably a pretty expensive pump. Now it's time to pull the lifters. Well, I wish I wasn't right, guys. Lifters look good. Lifters look good. Lifters look good. Lifter looks bad. So if you look at this one, that's a failed lifter. The rollers have failed, which has allowed the cam to beat the crap out of this thing. Now, obviously, I've seen worse. I've seen much worse. In fact, this engine has worse because when you go to this one is worse. That's a failed lifter. I wish I could say I was surprised. I really had hopes that they would have this figured out since, the Hemi's been in production since the early 2000s. But apparently it still plagues them. So 2 failed lifters, the rest of these look pretty good. Next, the crank pulley. At this point, I need to do something that I'm not proud of. My normal harmonic balancer puller will not fit one of these later model Hemi balancers. I don't have the tool that does, because I don't do a ton of these, but if these start becoming more popular, at least in this shop, I will buy one. So what I've done is I've used some long bolts, I've used this puller. I did this on the last one and it kind of worked. It worked enough to get it off, which I suppose that means it worked. So let's give this a shot. Please work. Oh yes. That worked really well. This is all I did. I ran some nuts and bolts through it. It did the job, but it's not ideal. At this point, I'm going to roll this thing over so that we can pull the oil pan. I need to pull the oil pan to get the front timing cover off. So we're just going to get this thing drained. Hopefully nothing crazy comes out of it. Coolant. Some oil. A lot of oil. A lot of oil. I feel like we're draining this thing. Yeah, so it had a couple quarts in it. It wasn't too crazy. Now we can unbolt the pan. Should be all of them. Let's see if Blue will help us out here. Now, this pan's already pretty beat up, so I'm not really worried about hurting it. It's difficult though. Just give it a couple. That was easy. Well, that's not what you want to see in there. So without light, not so bad. With light, lots of forbidden glitter. I'm really hoping the crank looks okay in this thing. I think the cam's going to be a goner with the condition of the lifters. But I don't see a lot of brass. There's a little bit of brass in here. Mostly silver. Look at that. Not good, but at least no chunky stuff. More swirly forbidden glitter, but pickup, only a few pieces of debris. Not too bad. Now we can remove the pickup. And the windage tray is still part of the oil pan gasket. It's all one piece, which makes it really fun to remove. It's actually a really good cost savings effort. One-time use these are. At first glance, everything looks pretty good. I don't see any indications that there's anything terribly wrong. Normally, if there was, you'd see a discolored rod cap from the friction from heat, and we don't see any of that. They all look to be about the same. But we're not going to get to the rotating assembly yet because we still have the front cover and the cam. That's what we're going to work on next. There's still more residual oil in here, so it'll help us twice as well to turn this thing over. Uh-oh. The block is moving around on my stand here. I guess I didn't get the bolts tight enough. It'll be fine. Now there's a few bolts left on this front cover. Is that it? I think that's it. Let's just give it some taps. This thing's coming apart nice and easy. Now it's time to remove the oil pump. Next, we're going to take the oil pump apart. See how much damage there is in here. Well, it's not looking good so far. Let's get this cleaned up and see what we can see. Well, the initial eyeball contact didn't seem to look too bad, but once you look past the housing, there's a little bit of damage there. A little bit of damage there. But what's interesting, at least I think it's interesting, normal wear on the sides, a little bit more on that side. But let's see if my camera will pick this up. Look at the damage on the inside. This is usually from material that's harder than these gears. So bearing material is soft and it will not do this damage to these gears at all. But the roller material from the lifters is absolutely as hard, if not harder than this material. And look what it did. Similar damage On the small gear, I wouldn't say that this won't make oil pressure, but I wouldn't use it. Next, we'll get the cam gear. Now, I know I should take the tensioner off and stuff, but we're not going to play by the rules. It's fine. See, the tensioner just fixed itself. It's good. That's interesting looking. It doesn't look like there's any damage. Chain, beautiful, but too short. Now it's time to pull the cam plate. Let's see if we can get this out this way. Oh yeah, that's not good. So the cam starts off pretty decent, much like every new engine. And then you get to this destroyed cam lobe. Look at how much material is gone. And then you get to the worser one. Now, this is not nearly as bad as it could be. I've seen them much worse than this. And I'm sure you guys that work at CDJR dealerships, you guys probably make a log cabin out of the amount of bad cams that you've seen. But either way, this is a bad cam. Probably only suitable as a lamppost. Let's get this ProTech oil filter off. I don't know that we're going to be able to cut this one, guys. No. I mean, it's not a bad oil filter. It's a Wix at least. But there's just no way that I can cut this thing with my oil filter cutter. And any other method that I use to cut this is going to throw a bunch of material in there. Sorry, guys. Next, we're going to just take the tensioner and the rail off. Let's see here. A little bit of wear. 2015, original. Looks good. Tensioner, I don't see any issues whatsoever. Next, we'll rotate this back over so we can start pulling the rotating assembly apart. Hopefully this thing stays pretty not like that. That's not what I wanted to happen, but it's okay. Perfect. Before I start on the rotating assembly, let's get this oil cooler off and the oil filter housing. I have to take that off so I can get to all the bolts that hold that to the block. I think I can. Perfect. Now we're going to rotate this just a little so we can get the first two rods and pistons out. Just like so. Now for the next two. This is the rusty one. On to the next two. And the final two. Before we go zipping some main caps off, we need to remove this rear main seal plate. Nice and easy. Well, there is one main cap bolt that I can't get out with my sockets because they are not deep enough. So we're going to get that out the old-fashioned way with a double wrench. That felt wonderful. Actually didn't hurt. All right, now we can zip the rest of this out. Well, that bolt's, look at all that sludge. Gross. Oh no! Well, everything was going smoothly. Well, that's depressing. That's super depressing. That is not supposed to fan out like that. Can I get this out? Let me get the proper tool for this. The real question is there damage? Well, we're gonna have to wait to find out, I guess. Journal doesn't look too terrible for what we just saw. Please be the only one that was like that. Okay. Oh, this one's got a few chunkies in it too. That's super depressing. Let's see if we can pick that out of there. Well, that's not what you want to find in there. I suppose it could be worse, but it's not good. I just want to check one thing before we pull the crank. All right, good. The crank doesn't really have excessive thrust bearing wear. I'm sure there could be some, but not enough to notice it when you check the crank like that. So now we can just hopefully lift this out. Let's start out with the good. The rod bearings really don't look too bad. That's probably the worst one there. There's a little bit of damage to a couple of these, but they're not really as bad as you would expect, considering it chewed up two lifters and sent that material through the engine. That one's got a little wear there too. All the rods look really nice. Pistons have a little bit of skirt wear. I think these are still very usable. They're certainly not trashed. All the rings seem to be pretty freed up. The ones that had rusty cylinders definitely look worse. I guess this core was stored outside, at least prior to the place that I got it from, prior to them getting it. Yeah, I don't really see anything too bad. They're not perfect, but I think they're still usable. It also depends on how expensive new ones are. Sometimes new ones are not very expensive, and it just totally doesn't make any sense to use used ones. I cleaned that one up just a little bit. And then there's main bearings. These are all wiped out. This one, they were delaminating, coming apart. We saw it jammed in the thrust bearing area, so we're going to have to take a look at that here in a moment. It didn't spin any, thank goodness. But it was on the road to do that. And it's odd that the main bearings have this much damage when the rods look that good, but it could be that the rotation of the crankshaft slings the oil towards the rod bearings and away from these. And the crankshaft, it's all going to depend on how bad it actually is, because a couple of these are pretty scored up. It looks like the thrust bearing area isn't really heavily damaged. And the journal isn't either. The bearing material is much softer than the journal, thank God. But it's certainly not ready to clean up and put some new bearings in. I think I'll take this over to the machine shop and see what they say about it, because these cranks do have quite a bit of value. And there's a better look at the thrust bearing. I think the block is going to be okay here. Thank God it didn't grab a bearing and spin it, because that would have done damage for sure. Let's roll this thing over and see what the bores look like. So the bores definitely are going to need a little bit of attention, but I don't know that it would require a lot of machine work. This is definitely a buildable block. I don't see any reason why this couldn't be fixed, but I do think it's too much damage to just stick a ball hone down and send it. So I don't think it's going to get all of that out, especially all the pitting from the rust. I'm sure a few of you were thinking the very same thing I was early on in this teardown. Why wouldn't you just throw lifters at it? And then that rest of the engine answered that question. It's a huge gamble, because you don't know how bad it actually is. It's a huge liability. The lifters are made out of incredibly hard metal, just a little bit softer than wrist pins. That's a joke, but it is very strong steel, and when that travels through both or all of the oiling circuits, it can destroy everything, certain things, or just one thing that is easy to fix. And you don't know, so it's a big gamble. There could be a situation where there's no other damage present. You put lifters in it, and then it lasts 3,000 miles because there was still some metal in the oiling circuits, and it wiped out the rest of the engine. That's why most people elect to replace the entire engine when the lifters fail. Now, if you catch it super early, your chances are increased that you could get away with just lifters, but it's also a huge risk. Also, there's nothing really terribly wrong with this engine. It needs machine work. If it hadn't got moisture in it, it would have been in much better condition. The crank, I'm confident that could be saved. It will have to go to the machine shop to be used. But this engine could have been rebuilt and put back into the vehicle, but that takes time. And a lot of these 6.4s, these 3/4 ton trucks, 1 ton trucks, they're service vehicles. When they're not on the road, someone's not making money. And that's why also a lot of people elect to just replace the engine, because it's a lot faster. I'm not going to say these engines are readily available everywhere, but if you got enough money, you could get a replacement engine in just a few days and the truck could be back into service. Now, I have read a bit about what causes these lifters to fail, because this has been a chronic issue with these engines since the Hemis came out. The overall consensus, and this is the internet talking, so take that with a grain of salt, is that because they are poorly lubricated, the angle of the lifter is pretty close to horizontal. They rely on splashed oil from the camshaft and the crankshaft. And at idle, there's not a lot of that going on. So vehicles that idle for a lot of time, like service vehicles, that is a problem. Now, I've also read that if you have your vehicle retuned and you have the idle bump from, I think the stock idle is around 650 RPM to 800 RPM, that greatly increases the amount of lubrication and the oil pressure at idle. So that would be something that's pretty straightforward to do. Also, change your oil on a regular basis. I know I mention that almost every single video, but that is a huge thing you can do to prolong the life of these engines. But if you can keep it from idling, you can raise your idle, and you change your oil on time, those three things, which are pretty simple to do, could really lengthen the life of your Hemi engine. Now, I've seen these engines with tons of miles on them. I've seen them with 350, 400,000 miles on them, but they probably weren't idling on dirty oil for hours on end. So, if you have one of these vehicles, I'm not telling you what to do, but I would do those things just for the peace of mind. Now, if you'd like to buy any parts out of this engine, this has a lot of really good stuff that I don't really get that often. This is the first 6.4 I've ever had the chance to get. You can go to our website, Importapart.com. If you don't see what you're looking for on there, you can fill out our part request form, which sends us an email of exactly what it is you're looking for. A lot of times these teardown parts don't make it to the website that quickly, so email is your best bet. So if you'd like to buy any of the parts out of this engine or anything else I've torn down, or if you need a 6.1 out of this 2006 SRT 8300C, you know how to find us. I really hope you enjoyed this teardown as always. I love all the comments, all the feedback, and even the criticism. I love it all, and I'll catch you on the next one.